Today I'm going to share with you the best science fiction fantasy published in 2024 so far, at least according to me. This is going to be talking about 5 science fiction books and 5 fantasy books. At the end of the year, I will do updated lists where each of the genres will get its own video with 10 books. And so this is kind of sharing the early buzzy books that I think are worth your time and money, or just simply worth getting from the library. If that all sounds good, let's get started. All right, let's mix it up and start with fantasy this time so that we end with my best science fiction book, which you probably have an idea what that is. But first, at the number 5 spot for fantasy, we have The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. And this is the first book in a new Holmesian mystery series that has fantastical elements. We follow this sleuth and their sidekick as they're going around trying to investigate this crime that has taken place. And it's a witty book full of good dialogue. There is a mystery at the center of it. I'm someone who loves the mystery genre and of course also loves when they bring in fantastical elements. And I did find the little bits of magic woven into the story quite interesting. I've come to really enjoy this author because I feel like they have a good range. Each of their stories and series are quite distinct. And so even if you like one, you don't necessarily know if you're going to like another one just because the writing, the style, the tone, everything is always so different than the last. This one definitely isn't, again, the top book of the year, but it easily makes the spot at number 5. And I do look forward to reading more of the series when it eventually comes out. Then at number 4, we have The Fee Hunter by Celine Goldenberg. And this is a book I just recently talked about. It is a story that follows a fee hunter, essentially a demon monster hunter, and they get pulled into a larger story when they come upon this pregnant woman, and they agree to help her as they go through these dark, forbidden woods, and so the stories get intertwined from there. This is one I just really enjoyed. Demon hunting, it's something that I'm always looking for in stories, and often those books do not live up to my expectation, which thankfully was completely met here. I thought the world building was great. It's probably one of my favorite aspects, is that there's a lot of back history to how people become fee hunters and their story and who they are, and the world itself is kind of slowly revealed to us, and I just soaked it all in. I thought it was fascinating, a little bit fresh, a little bit different, and when it leaned into the tropes, it did so in a way that I found really enjoyable and had a lot of fun with this book. I would definitely check out more by this author. Then at number 3, we have The Silver Blood Promise, and this is a story of a young man who has forsaken his noble house. He has dropped out of the academy that he was studying in, and now spends his days drinking and playing cards and just being a bit of a nobody. However, this changes when he finds out that his father, his noble father, has been killed, and then of course he takes it upon himself to try to investigate and find out what happened. And then, as these stories always tend to be, there is more going on. There is a larger story that is eventually unfolding, and then we are swept into that. And so I like this one a lot. It's very intimate in terms of the character focus. So a lot of it takes place in this particular setting, and you really feel the grittiness of the city, and you get to know this one character very well. He is, again, imperfect. Just given that setup, you know that he is not necessarily the knight in shining armor that you see in more classic fantasy. And so I really like this one. It kind of scratched similar itches to things like The Lies of Locke Lamora, and it leans into some things that you could be arguably described as tropey, but I think, again, it does it really well. I like the writing, I like the character work, and I didn't mind the parts of the story with kind of familiar and things that I have read before, because when it's done really well, I just have a good time reading it, which is what is the case here. Then at number 2, we have Feybound by Sarah L. Arafi, and this is the first book in a new series that, again, I recently talked about. It's a piece of epic fantasy where we follow 2 sisters, particularly 2 elf sisters. Right at the beginning of the story, something happens and the one is banished, the other sister follows her, and as they go into the woods, they find out that the Fae, these creatures that they believe to be long dead out, actually still exist, and of course, from there, a larger story starts to brew. This is one that really surprised me. Again, I picked it up with no expectations, but sometimes is the best experience. And then I found myself completely engrossed in it. I think it has a fantastic focus on sibling bonds, specifically the sisterhood between the 2. They're both distinct characters, and really you get to see their back and forth, which felt like real sisters in the good and the bad and all of that. And then you have, again, the larger world, the mystery of all of it. And again, if you told me at the beginning of the year that one of my favorite fantasy books would be involving fae and elves, I wouldn't believe you. The premise sounds incredibly cutesy, but the story itself has a lot of grit and teeth to it. It deals with oppression and circumstance, and I think it has some really good conversations around society and the things we do to each other. I think There's some really good meaty topics explored here in a way that, again, doesn't feel cutesy in any way. Instead, takes these magical topics and magical ideas that you see done over and over again and somehow makes them feel a little bit different because the author goes in some ways that I found to be unexpected. I almost passed on this book because of the themes and topics surrounding fae and elves, but I'm so glad that I took a chance because I'm pretty obsessed with this book. I've read it once and I'm impatiently waiting for the library to give me back a copy because I really want to reread it again before the end of the year, just so I know exactly where it's going to show up on that top 10, because it's going to be there. And finally, the best fantasy of the year so far, and honestly it might be the book of the year, is The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan, the third and final book in the Justice of Kings. And of course, this is a series that follows a man who is the justice and does the work of the king. So he investigates and then proceeds to claim justice and follow through with the law of the land. And we follow the story from the perspective of his assistant, his scribe, Helena. And so we see the story from her perspective. And I can't say too much about the plot at this point, but I'm completely pulled into the story and it had a fantastic ending. In my mind, it really hit on what I expected and looked for in a conclusion. I think the character work is some of the best I've read in the genre. I think the characters are complex and realized, and I love the interplay and relationship between them, as well as the world building is fascinating, the magic is cool, there's tiny little bits of horror-ish elements in here, which I'm always happy about, and this author has fantastic writing. The prose is just so enjoyable to read. I love the series, I can't recommend it enough. You do want to start back in the beginning, but the first book was my favorite book, I believe, 2 years ago, and then the second book was my favorite book last year. And like I said, this is the book to beat because there's a good chance this is going to be in the #1 spot in December, but we'll have to see about that, won't we? All right, now let's switch over to science fiction and do that countdown all over again. Starting at number 5, we have Past Crimes by Jason Pinter. And this is a sci-fi thriller that is set in a future where there is laws where individuals, once they have committed crime, essentially give away the rights to their own story. And so because of this, true crime in this future create these virtual realities that recount their horrible crimes and then sell them to the public for entertainment. We follow an individual who is pulled into all of this, and of course within the story there is a question of whether or not the person is actually guilty, and the story goes on from there. This is one I love because I think the premise of this novel is incredibly topical right now. It deals with a lot of interesting themes, first being our world's obsession with true crime, which admittedly I do on and off fall down that rabbit hole. I do read and review true crime. I recognize the challenges or issues with it as a genre, but I do still consume it. Good or bad, I consume it, but I recognize its faults. And so it has that conversation going on, and then a lot of other conversations surrounding the entertainment of it, the commercialization of it, and then of course looking at VR technology and how it is introduced with crime work. And it just felt very perfect for this time. I think it's very relevant in 2024, and a lot of the conversations within this book that is otherwise just entertaining had a lot of really smart undertones playing within it. And so I had a really good time reading this one. I don't see a lot of other people talking about it, so I'm hoping to change that with this video here. And again, if you're looking for a thriller that's a little bit different, you're looking for those sci-fi elements that mix together with some crime, I think that this one has a lot of cross appeal, and hopefully you enjoyed as much as I did. Then at number 4, we have To Challenge Heaven by David Weber and Chris Kennedy. This is technically the third book in a military science fiction series, and one that I actually read first before going back and reading the other 2 books. And in my mind, you shouldn't start here because of plot reasons, but I also had an amazingly good time falling into this world and getting to learn about everything that was happening and figure out the backstory of the previous 2 books just by reading this one. This one in my mind is the strongest of all the published books in this series, and I had a great time with it. Technically it's spoilers to say too much of the plot, but there is this alien force that is in conflict with Earth, and specifically what these alien-like creatures are is really appealing to me. There's some horror-ish elements going on there, and again, I can't say more, but this series just has good action, good characters, and I just really enjoyed the strategy elements of this, which is not something I often say. I can be very hit or miss when it comes to military science fiction because I don't think of myself as someone who loves just reading about action scenes, but I thought this one had a great precision to how it was depicted and described that really allowed me to imagine what was going on. And again, I was just dropped in the middle of it because I should have read the other two books first. And I had such a good time because, again, I think the author, or authors in this case, nailed the book so well that it was a joy to piece it all together, and I really was able to understand what was happening even without the backstory of the first two books, which again is a strange thing to say. Wouldn't normally say that, but totally the case here. Love this one. Then we have at number 3, Jump Knots by Hao Jingfang, and this is a book that is translated from Chinese. We follow two different factions of Earth that are very much divided between the two of them, and then right at the beginning of the story there is a third force that comes in, this alien force, and of course, as you imagine, it changes up all the political dynamics as we then have to deal with what to do in this situation. This one is very idea focused, very much dealing with these hypothetical situations. This one does slightly remind me of the Three Body Problem and its sequels, although I'm always hesitant to make that comparison because I think it leaves people disappointed. But definitely if you love the cerebral aspects, if you just love an author playing around with big ideas and using characters as somewhat pawns to play out different scenarios along the way, you love the idea of another force outside of Earth, if there's something beyond humans, and love playing around with those concepts, this one was smart. It's slow paced. It possibly loses something in translation, I'm not quite sure. It wasn't a 5-star read for me, but it's the kind of book that even though I saw imperfections while reading it, I cannot stop thinking about it afterwards, which is why it's rated so high on this list. Is I really look for books that leave an impression on me, that leave me thinking about them, mulling things over and wanting to revisit them, just so I can see if I can glimpse more detail from the story, because I think it has a lot of meat in it and there's a lot to think about. So if you're the kind of reader who is looking for science fiction like that, that is going to be less action heavy and more about these big ideas, I do recommend it. I think the right audience is going to love this book. Then at number 2, we have Disquiet Gods by Christopher Ruocchio, the, I believe, 6th book in the Sun Eater series. I have done a separate review video that is spoiler-free for that book if you want to go check out more of my thoughts. I can't say too much at this point in terms of the actual plot details, but essentially this is a series that I liked at the beginning and have really grown to love the later books. It's a series that kind of starts smaller and snowballs into a larger story where you care so much deeper for the characters, and it's building towards this finale that will come, I believe, in the last book that should be published by next year. Very excited for where the series is going. Had a great time reading this. And if you want to check out the series, you do have to start back at the beginning. Again, I've done a series review to give you an idea what to expect from it. But if you're caught up like me, I'd love to know your thoughts. For me, Disquiet Gods is the best in the series yet. I'd love to know where you think the series peaks so far. And finally, at the number 1 spot, we have Womb City. This is a horror dystopian book that was noticeably absent from my top 10 dark fiction books, and that's because I wanted to include it in this list. While it does have horror elements, I think it is better suited for science fiction readers, or at least those that are looking for that dystopian setting, because while it is a blend of genres, I do see it as first and foremost a piece of horrible dystopian fiction in the best possible way. And so this is one, again, I did a whole separate review. I'm going to link that over in the cards because I just encourage you to listen to my thoughts, but they're all fresh. But this follows a woman who is in a society where people have the ability to extend their lives by moving into younger bodies, and we deal with all these social and economic challenges that come with a system like that. You find out at the beginning of the story that she is struggling with infertility and ends up having a baby in sort of a surrogate body, but not a human body, but rather an artificial one. And it deals with all the complications that come around challenges in fertility. And this book hit me on an emotional level. It was dark and gritty. It's not an easy read. It's not a fun read. And you have to be in the right space for something like this. There's tons of trigger warnings that I encourage you to look up if you have any concerns yourself regarding any of these gritty topics. But if you're up for the read, which thankfully I was, when I picked up this book, I was apparently in the perfect mood for it. This was a 5-star read for me, and I don't give out 5 stars easily. I love this book. I can't stop thinking about it. I look forward to rereading it. Again, when I'm in the right space, because I have to be ready for it. But this book holds no punches. It will smack you in the stomach. And I really loved it. It is smart and thoughtful and deals with some really interesting topics, but at the same time it has a good narrative drive, it has a good plot, and kind of gives me everything I'm looking for in a story. So I do recommend it. It's not going to be for everyone, so again, please check out my full review if you're not sure if it's for you. But if you're someone like me with my personal tastes and just looking for a really emotional read that is going to hit you in all the right or wrong places, I recommend this one. It was such a powerful read, and like I said, I can't stop thinking about it. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And don't forget, if you want more recommendations, I've already posted my top 10 horror and thriller books that I have read and are published this year, as well as my backlist video should be out by now too. So if you would love to stick around and subscribe, I appreciate that. I hope to talk to you soon. If you want to help me with this video, you can give it a big thumbs up. Drop an emoji in the comments just to let me know you're here, or if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss another video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.